Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is Ana Sylvia, and I am a senior here at Elon, double majoring in political science and international studies. It is my pleasure to introduce this important event today, sponsored by the Council of Civic Engagement, as well as the Latinx student community here at Elon. The first part of the program will be a panel discussion, and the second part of the program will be a deeper dive discussion with Latinx students featuring 2 guest speakers who will attest to how DACA has directly impacted them. But first, let's meet our panelists. First, we have Dr. Carew, who will be our moderator. She is a faculty member in the Political Science and Policy Studies Department here at Elon. Next, we have Professor Brandon Sheridan, who's a faculty member of the Department of Economics. His primary research interests involve the intersection of international trade, education, and economic growth. Next, we have Katie LaPlante, who is the assistant, can you guys hear me okay? Okay. The Assistant Director of Counseling and Family Programs for Elon Academy. In this capacity, she works very closely with families of DACA recipients. Next, we have Dr. Vanessa Bravo, who's a faculty member in the School of Communications. She has done extensive research with the Latinx populations here in the area. Finally, we have Heather Scavone, who is director of the Humanitarian Immigration Law Clinic and faculty member at Elon's Law School in Greensboro. The Humanitarian Immigration Law Clinic represents refugees, asylees, asylum seekers, parolees, certified victims of trafficking, and Iraqi and Afghani special immigrants with immigration benefits, applications including adjustment of status, affirmative asylum, family reunification, and naturalization. I will now turn this over to our moderator, Dr. Carew.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ana. I would just like to again reiterate our thanks for you coming out this evening to this panel on changes that we've seen in policies concerning the executive action around this idea of DACA, right? So the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And I again want to thank the Council on Civic Engagement and Sylvia Munoz, as well as the panelists, for being willing to come out and talk about these issues. Now, before we get started, I just want to kind of reiterate that this is a place in which we are very fortunate at Elon to be able to have the opportunity to engage in some sort of civil discourse and examination of issues that are really important to us within our broader community. And particularly tonight in terms of this one aspect regarding immigration. And so I want you to take a moment to really think about how you might reflect on various ideas and concerns, information and misinformation that's been given over time, and what questions you may have that come up concerning this issue. At the same time, I also want to encourage you to remember that these are policies that are related to real people. Right? They have very real effects on people in terms of their past, their present, and their future, as well as some sort of life chances. And so in the midst of our examination of these empirical issues and empirical evidence regarding the legal and economic and social ramifications of this type of policy, you should always make sure that you keep at the forefront of your mind the fact that these are policies that influence people in a very real type of way. So in terms of how we'll proceed through the rest of the panel, I'm going to ask a couple of brief questions of individuals on the panel to give everyone an opportunity to speak on our understanding of how this will have some sort of influence more broadly on society. And then we will give an opportunity for you all to ask questions as well. So my first question, to whomever would like to start.
We can't hear you.
Okay, I can speak up. My first, and let me know if the mic comes back on. My first question is what do you find to be the most influential or important likely consequence of the Trump administration deciding to rescind DACA? And this can be based on your area of expertise or your broader understanding of how it might have an influence.
Okay, I'll start. I think for me, one of the most concerning consequences is that 5 years ago, we, as a country, told 800,000 young people who came here when they, in average, were 6 years old. Some younger, some older, but on average, they were 6 years old. We told them 5 years ago, come out of the shadows, allow us to fingerprint you, allow us to take your picture, give us your address, tell us where your parents live, let us check that you have no criminal record, that you are doing well in school, that you maybe were in the military. Is awful, the sound?
It's a little muffled. We can try the handheld too.
Is this better? Worse? The same? Okay. So we told them, come forward, get out of the shadows, give us all your information, and now we are telling them, just joking, and we can deport you. I think as a country, that's not who the United States is supposed to be, and especially because we are talking about young people who are working or are in school or were in school, who serve the military, who pay $500 every time they have to renew this permit, who we are tracking in terms of knowing where they live, what they are doing, whether they are committing any crime or not, which the answer is no. And then these are Americans. It's just that they were not born in the United States, but by any other mean, they consider themselves Americans. They grew up in this country. They contribute to this country. And so for me, that's very concerning that we told them, trust us, and now we are telling them, we have all the information that you shared, and we can damage you with that information.
So I agree wholeheartedly with Dr. Bravo and want to bring a kind of technical perspective to what can be a pretty emotionally charged subject. But one consequence that I think of is one that relates to the country's enforcement capabilities and priorities. And that is that effectively our national security can be compromised by rescinding DACA. And what I mean by that is that we have finite enforcement capacity. So the immigration enforcement entity focuses its resources on certain populations and is only able to remove a certain amount of people. So DACA recipients of the general population comprise folks who've been fully vetted, who we know do not have criminal histories, and who have been scrutinized for character and, again, background. So if they end up going into the queue of people who are going to be removed from the United States, that actually forces us to focus our enforcement resources away from violent criminals and on people who we 100% know have not gotten into trouble with the law. Again, that's a technical perspective, but I think it's an important one because, for example, for perspective on this issue, in 2015, I went with a group of Elon law students to South Texas to a civil detention facility where women and children who have civil immigration violations are held. And at that time, we decided to represent one woman from Guatemala. And in March of 2015, she was calendared for a hearing in November of 2019. So that's how long the delay is between her initial hearing in court and then when she's actually going to have an opportunity to argue her case. That's how many years of backlog we have in the immigration court system. If we now further clog it with young people who have been vetted, who we know do not present any type of criminal risk in the United States, that means that our ability to track down and remove people who are violent criminals is that much diminished.
So for me, my perspective on the consequences comes from two perspectives. That's of education and access to education for these individuals, and also from a mental health perspective. As a psychologist, I know and have seen, as I've supported students through the DACA process, how it has changed their approach to life and their approach to college. In terms of education and educational access, we've seen that some states prior to DACA barred students that were undocumented from accessing post-secondary education. States like Alabama and South Carolina. In 2008, South Carolina banned all post-secondary access for undocumented students for both 4- and 2-year institutions. In 2013, after DACA, they opened that back up, and because the federal government said they are here lawfully, they allowed students to now access education, which changes, as you know, as a student, if you are one, it changes everything. And the policies vary by state in terms of if they're allowed to get in-state tuition. Only 6 states provide both access to in-state tuition and access to state aid. So what we'll encounter a lot of times is that these undocumented students are as qualified academically as any citizen student, but funding the education is difficult. And so with the phasing out of DACA, as students lose it over time, I think we're going to see that there's going to be inconsistencies in the way that these students can access post-secondary education by state. In terms of the mental health consequences, we know from the literature that when risk of deportation increases, anxiety and depression increase. So we now have students who are anxious and depressed. They have no access to the Affordable Care Act, to Medicaid, to mental health resources that can help them. They lose their work permits, they lose their driver's license, they lose the ability to be productive members of society. And what I saw personally with students that were granted DACA was that they had hope. They felt legitimacy, they felt some freedom, they felt like they were able to contribute to their families in ways that their families really needed, because oftentimes we know that there's mixed immigration statuses in families. So we have some family members that are documented and some that are undocumented, and the earning potential for undocumented individuals is significantly lower. So students that could go to school, that could get a job, could contribute to their families and have the potential to change their family's trajectory was really key. And so I think that that's something that we'll really need to be aware of as DACA is rescinded, in terms of these students being able to continue to be productive members of this society.
So as an economist, I tend to take more of a bird's eye view of the issue. And it's also kind of hard to disentangle DACA from the larger issue of immigration. So I'm happy in the Q&A if anybody has questions to try to address those. But I'll try to be specific to DACA here. So one of the goals of, I guess, our government seems to be they want the economy to grow over time and increase people's living standards. And with this policy, it's really strange because it's kind of like they're saying, we don't really like money. The DACA recipients are really only contributing to the economy, and so by throwing them into this uncertainty, you not only are harming the immediate victims, which would be the DACA recipients now and those that could be receiving that in the future, but you also have a lot of long-term implications. So just a couple of numbers. I won't bore you with numbers, but just a couple. A couple of conservative estimates of sort of the impact of DACA. So just the recipients that have been granted deferred status as of now look to add about $215 billion to GDP and $60 billion in tax revenue over the next 10 years. So it's like the government's saying, never mind, we don't really want that. That's not to mention the fact that typically second generation immigrants, so people that would be children of the DACA recipients, tend to be higher earning and thus contribute at higher levels in terms of tax dollars and things like that to the economy as they grow older. So you have short-term, really large uncertainty and just catastrophic consequences for DACA recipients. Long-term, I think it sends a lot of bad signals in terms of how the economy is going to grow in the future, especially one like the U.S. that has very large foreseeable, predictable demographic challenges with an aging population going forward.
Thank you very much. I guess in terms of my own response here, if I'm looking at it from a political perspective, I really would say that this calls into question our understanding of exactly what executive power is, right? The Constitution is not very clear on exactly what it means by executive power, but this is something that has altered and shifted over time. And particularly, we've seen the growth of executive power. In terms of politics, we have this idea of executive power. And usually, rationally speaking, presidents don't want to get rid of that power for themselves, right? Because, thank you. Who wants to actually have less power? And so we're finding that the Trump administration is suggesting with this one particular policy point, right, that they think that they should have less of that power and that it should be something that goes over to the legislative branch. Now, reasonably speaking, right, we can expect that that's reasonable, right? Some sort of policy concerning immigration should be coming from the legislative branch. However, when President Obama put this into play, he did it because he had indicated that this was an issue that needed to be taken care of, right? Some sort of comprehensive immigration reform. And the Congress decided to not do anything about it. And we're very clear that they were attempting to ensure that he was not able to get a legislative victory. And so he said, I'll do what I can within the parameters of executive power if you don't move on this. They said they weren't going to move, and so this is what he came up with, right? Some sort of prosecutorial discretion, right, which is something that is considered to be within the executive powers of the presidency. And all presidents since President Truman have engaged in this particular type of action with regards to various immigrant groups, right? And so to step back from that and say, the presidency doesn't really have this particular power is something that's going to be problematic in future years, right, for future presidencies when this particular type of issue comes forward. Now, if I'm looking more from a personal view in terms of what I think is kind of most important or influential, I think it's really important that we're working to say, hey, those individuals who are on DACA are hardworking and they are contributing to society. However, one thing that concerns me about this is that we're setting up this strange dynamic in covering it this way as our public discourse regarding DACA enrollees. And that's because if you say these DACA individuals are the good people, right, then we set up for ourselves in society this idea that any other people who are undocumented are not the good people. And that's a problem in terms of how we think about individuals who may be seen as being in violation of some sort of law. And it brings us into ideas of just and unjust, and that's something that perhaps we can talk about in the Q&A. Okay, so my second question before we open it up is, what is it that you think should be done in order to avoid or ameliorate any of the problems that we think are going to come forward after this 6-month window when it's fully rescinded? Should we start in order?
Sure. So I think one important thing is that citizens need to visibly support non-citizens. If you think about it, non-citizens, in terms of their advocacy abilities, they have more to lose and more to risk by going out in the open and protesting and being politically visible. And citizens are protected in a way that non-citizens are not. And so visibly supporting non-citizens is one thing that can do. And doing that by supporting legislation that's going to help individuals with an outcome akin to like the Dreamer legislation. So one thing you can do is call your legislators, so your senators and your reps in the House of Representatives, and encourage them to support legislation like the DREAM Act. There are a number of immigration bills that may be voted on, maybe not. One is called the RAISE Act. That one is very bad. Tell them not to support that one. It sounds uplifting. It is not. It is oppressive. So that's something that you can do.
To add to that, I think if we are going to go into the let's approve a bill way, it has to be a clean bill, meaning that we are going to help the DACA recipients without using them as bait, meaning it cannot be a bill that we will approve if you also support the wall, right? This has to be about DACA recipients. You cannot say, well, yes, this, but if you do that, it has to be a clean bill. And it has been attempted before, and it had bipartisan support before. Regretfully, in 2010, it went to Congress, it passed the House, but it died in the Senate. It required 60 votes, and it received 56. Out of the 41 votes that went against, 36 votes against were from one political party. 5 were from the other political party. So it starts with bipartisan support, but it needs to remain that way. And we need people, voters, but also politicians are supporting the DACA recipients. So it has, I guess, to go through the bill route, but it has to be a clean bill, meaning this is for DACA recipients. You cannot, again, use DACA kids or DACA young people as bait to achieve other things. That's what I think.
I think we also have to be aware of maintaining, and if they're not, they're already creating safe spaces for DACA recipients to talk about how this has made them feel. We have to keep in mind that though this stressor of DACA being rescinded was just announced, it's going to be a long-term chronic stressor. Every day it's in the news, every day there's reports of conversations that took place and who's supporting what, and this is something that will continue to be a stress factor for these students. So we have to be open to this continued conversation about how it affects them emotionally and socially, mental health-wise, with their job, with their education. There's a resource called Educators for Fair Consideration, and they have a whole toolkit about how to make classrooms undocu-friendly, how to be allies, how to create sanctuary spaces. There's a lot of talk about sanctuary cities, but there's even a movement to create sanctuary campuses where campuses can resist interacting with ICE other than what's absolutely necessary in giving information about undocumented students. So there are ways to get involved in the classroom and to be and use your citizenship if you have it as and recognize it's a privilege and use that to advocate for those who don't have that privilege and allow them that space to have the conversation. I think we can also create more scholarships and pathways to funding for education that aren't tied to citizenship. I think that's one way to allow students to continue to go to college as we figure out what's going to happen with DACA and other bills like it.
I don't really have a whole lot to add, so I would just say I would agree with everything they said, and then also more events like this, not only here, but across the country. So your voice is most likely to be heard if it's loud, and so the way you make it loud is by having lots of people sort of talking about the same issue at the same time. So I think more conversations about exactly what DACA is, who the recipients are, the fact that just because you receive DACA isn't some like permanent solution. It's still every 2 years you have to go through the process, you have to pay a lot of money, you have to be stressed out. That's not good for the economy either. Uncertainty is a big enemy of the economy. So yeah, more awareness. Getting a clean bill would be fantastic. I don't know if that will happen, but it would be great.
Exactly, right? In a perfect world, which we can never live in, because nothing is ever perfect, right? But I agree that I think that a clean DREAM Act bill would be really important, as well as just more broadly some sort of comprehensive immigration reform that centers its policies on what's best for the people more broadly, rather than particular interests or old ways of thinking that are coming back into style, let's say it that way. Okay, so I'm going to open it up now to your questions, whether it has to do with, issues concerning the law or whatever it may be that you in general would like to talk about. And I think these are here. And we have two mic stands, so if you all want to get in line, please feel free to do so.
Or,
Does it work? Is it?
Oh, yes.
All right. So I had a question about the legislation. I know North Carolina's Senator Tillis is sponsoring a bill. I don't know much about the bill itself, though. I wondered if any of you guys could talk about what his specific bill is, if we should be calling Senator Tillis and saying, you're doing a good job, or saying, you're a big dirtbag.
I haven't seen that particular legislation specifically, so I don't know if you all.
I'll try to look it up on my phone while we're taking the next question. Hold on.
I don't know the details either, but I called and I sent faxes and I got a reply, and the reply is something like, yeah, we are working on fixing the DACA situation, but at the same time we have to secure the border. So I agree with both statements, but not connected. So it seems to me that his reply was, yes, but we are going to use this to achieve this. Maybe I'm wrong because I just got the email today. But I would be paying attention to, if I was you as well, what that initiative encompasses, because it might be that, give me this, but I'll give you this, but only if you give me that. And so, but we need to pay more attention.
I think at last count, there were already 6 different bills, so bear with me. Next question.
Sorry, I actually went to DC on Wednesday with 5 more dreamers, and we visited his office. And what we have been told is that it's a priority to introduce his own legislation because he wants to be his own shine and light. And he did not say exactly what it means, but basically it's going to be the same thing as the DREAM Act, except that if you have a misdemeanor or more, that you will not be able to apply for his legislation. And we reminded him very eloquently that since we are in North Carolina, and you can be stopped by the way you look, that some of us will have a misdemeanor in our driving record because some of us were not able to have driver's licenses not too long ago before DACA existed. So to keep that in mind, and that we'll continue to push to make sure that the legislation that comes about will not have restrictions like that. And the staffer, Courtney Temple, told us that she'll pass that message along because in some states, a misdemeanor could be being stopped for not stopping at a stoplight, and for some other states, it might be something. She said something about pornographic for children, which I was like, way to escalate, but just politics. So make sure you do find out. He has not introduced anything yet, even though it's his priority. But when he does introduce something, we need to make sure that we're calling and pushing for what we want, because he wants to be the star, and he will not get behind Dick Durbin's rematch.
Thank you. Thank you.
He has previously sponsored the Save Our Small and Seasonal Businesses Act. And so I think one thing that you will hear, Senator Cotton is a sponsor of the RAISE Act, the one that I said is really bad. That one focuses on only allowing high-skilled people to come to the United States, which is a really misguided principle. We have so much need for agricultural workers in North Carolina. Business owners do not want something that's going to restrict immigration to admissions only of really high-skilled workers. So anything that stays away from language like that.
Thank you so much for going to DC and taking action. You are incredible. Let's talk after. So our government is threatening to deport 800,000 people that are contributing to our economy, that are getting education, that are paying taxes. Do you think this is the start of an ethnic cleansing process?
Well, that's a tough question. My answer is I don't know. But unless you are a straight, white, male of high class, I would be concerned.
Any? With regards, with regards to that question, and I guess kind of piggybacking off of what you're saying, we've seen some troubling things from this administration prior to actually getting into office, right? Because it wasn't an administration at the time, as well as since then, connected to issues and concepts related to white supremacy. And so in terms of outright ethnic cleansing, in terms of, well, if you're looking at it from an academic perspective, which can be problematic at times, perhaps it's not at that point of shifting into that. However, it certainly seems to match up to some of these ideologies that we've seen in place.
So if DACA is completely rescinded in the future, is there any way for these people to stay in the country legally or not be deported?
So I think there's the narrative around immigration pathways to citizenship is really convoluted and really misinformed. And you even heard in the first CNN clip, they used misguided vocabulary. They said DACA is for children brought here illegally as children. That's not true. Some people who benefit from DACA were brought in without permission. You heard there was a Kenyan DACA recipient. It's unlike, we don't have a land border with Kenya. He probably didn't walk across a land border to come to the United States. So some people came on visas and overstayed them. So with DACA recipients, the great myth around immigration is that you could just get in line and wait for your turn to come. And in fact, for 99% of the world's population, there is no line to get in. Some DACA recipients might have other avenues to a path to permanent residence and then citizenship. Many of them will not. But the truth is that unless you have one of a few very specific either family relationships, employment relationships, or serious misfortune, such as you were tortured in your home country based on your race or religion, or you're a victim of a serious crime, those are the pathways to citizenship under our current immigration legal structure, and this is why we need the comprehensive reform.
So every time that you hear, go and put yourself on the back of the line, as she said, there's no back of the line. If you don't qualify for those few categories, you just don't qualify. So there's no way.
And some of the lines are outrageously long. So right now, if you're a U.S. citizen, but you have a sibling in the Philippines, it takes more than 24 years for you to bring your sibling here lawfully. So.
Could you just discuss a little bit more the constitutionality or unconstitutionality of Obama's implementation of the executive action, and just like why Trump interprets that as being unconstitutional?
Sure. Me? Okay, great. So there are a couple of things here. One is that, as I indicated before, right, this is based on some sort of executive action relating to how we implement our immigration laws. And so there is some sort of discretion that presidents have relating to that. Now, if President Obama had set it up so that he was allowing for some sort of direct pathway to citizenship, this would have been something that very clearly would have been in violation of some sort of issue relating to the Constitution, because that goes into the legislative powers rather than executive powers. Here, in terms of how he set this up, it's very specific to some sort of granting of visas and so forth, and ensuring that for 2-year periods, right, that have to be renewed, that you have some sort of reprieve from removal, right? And this is that's the language that was used by current Attorney General Jeff Sessions in his letter to the Department of Homeland Security to say, hey, I think that you should get rid of DACA, which they then relatively promptly decided to do within the administration. And the reason that sorry, to back up, the reason that he's able to say that to the Department of Homeland Security is that this executive action is actually largely based on a memo or a memorandum that was sent to the Department of Homeland Security about how to proceed with how to handle cases of removal for these individuals. Now, there's the argument, right, that by way of allowing for people to have some sort of documentation for working, that we've then moved out of the powers that are held by the executive. And so this is where things get a bit dicey with regards to the arguments that are made back and forth. There was another executive action that came after this, that's DAPA, right, which is the Deferred Action for Parents of Americans. And this is something that the courts have struck down, or at least they've stopped. And so what happened was that 9 attorneys general, it was 10 and then it went to 9, attorneys general decided that they were going to try to challenge DACA in court, or at least that's what they told the Trump administration, with the caveat of, well, we won't send it to an unfavorable federal court system if you go ahead and rescind it now, right? With the threat that it's going to be interpreted in the same way as DAPA. And so they decided to do that. And so basically, rather than the Trump administration deciding to argue for its constitutionality, which they have a good case for doing, they decided that they did not want to argue for this Obama-era policy, and then to suggest that they're pushing that off to the legislative branch. Does that kind of answer? Okay.
I think Dr. Carew makes great points, and one comment that Attorney General Jeff Sessions made, which was really disingenuous, was that by eliminating the DACA executive actions at this point, it's just heading off eventual additional litigation, such as that which ended up getting DAPA, the second iteration of DACA, overturned by the Supreme Court. And that was just a misstatement of fact, and it's impossible to think that the Attorney General of the United States wouldn't understand the difference between this, because what the Supreme Court did is they were a body of only 8 deciders, 8 judges at the point that DAPA went up. And so the fact that they had a 4-4 split didn't mean that they agreed with the lower court's ruling. It just meant that that lower court's ruling stood. And also, the decision on DAPA had to do with this really nitty-gritty administrative law feature about how federal rulemaking is done. And there's a period of time that you have to, publish rules for notice and comment. And so DAPA was, if it was improper, it was improper on non-constitutional grounds, on these really nitty-gritty federal rulemaking grounds.
I had a question regarding just the ties back to Elon, just to bring everything a little bit full circle. As of now, Elon University discloses the immigration statuses of its students to the federal government, to the Department of Homeland Security through the SEVIS program. And I'm curious from your perspective, just a yes or no and an explanation as to why you think it. Should Elon become a sanctuary campus and withhold that information about student immigration statuses?
Part of the system for admitting students on student visas requires participation in that program, so you wouldn't be able to have any students here on student visas if you didn't participate in that part. But I think Elon has made affirmative statements that beyond what is legally required, they will protect the privacy of all students. And I think that's the right thing to do. Others?
Should Elon become a sanctuary campus?
I'm going to be a law professor and turn it Socratic on you. What do you think a sanctuary campus means?
Should Elon disclose the immigration statuses of its students to the federal government?
So Elon does not do that except where legally required. What I think sanctuary campus has different meanings, and one of them, the most weighty version of the definition is a campus that physically protects students from immigration enforcement, meaning physically shielding you from enforcement officers if federal officers were to show up. And so that's why I asked, which do you mean? Because certainly I think the school has been very forthright that it will not share information beyond what it legally must with immigration customs enforcement.
Day of the election, can you guys hear me? Yeah. Day of the election results, I had my friend check the Canadian citizenship and the Australian citizenship websites, and they were both down. Now, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, even though there's ethical, legal, monetary reasons not to go through with DACA, rescinding it. Should that happen, are there any steps people can take now to prepare themselves and set themselves up for at least a good, if not better, future?
Like moving to Australia or Canada?
Sure. Or something less extreme.
Yeah.
I think we need to consider any other options first, and I think we need to, if you are a citizen, you need to speak up with your friends and family, but also you have to sign up petitions, you have to call your senators and House representatives, you have to show up at meetings. There is so many things we can do, not to mention that, imagine and this is a government estimate, it will cost $10,800 to remove a person, one single individual from the United States. So it's a big, big cost financially. But I think, I am not going to say what you personally should do or not, but I think there are so many ways in which we can fix the situation without even considering where to go. I'm Costa Rican, I still keep my bank account there and all that just in case, but that's a different story.
And I didn't mean to be flip to your question. I think, people joke or maybe talk seriously about moving to Canada or Australia, but it might surprise you to know that they have their own immigration and nationality laws too, and you can't just decide to move there necessarily because you want to.
Just a counterpoint. We had a professor, I believe it was last year, moved to Canada because of the racist impact that on the family from the Burlington community.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid those might escalate even further, so other people might want to look into a complete set of options.
And she and her family were already originally from Canada, and so that made that particular avenue much easier as compared to what many people may have in terms of their own options, unfortunately.
Hello. Yeah, you guys have a wealth of diversity on the actual panel of an economist or education or communications or law. That being said, if there is a way, how should we frame discussion on this? What do we sacrifice in order to have actual change? You know what I'm saying? Is there a right way to approach this? A lot of people will argue, the economics of it all are very important, but also the humanity of 800,000 kids. Is there a right way to do it, and if so, how should we go about that?
I think the humanity aspect is probably the most important. So coming from an economist, hopefully that holds some weight. But if I could beat the econ drum for just a second, I think a lot of the underlying motivations for people deciding to immigrate are economic, right? They want a better life for them and their families. And I think a lot of the opposition to immigration is the exact same thing. They think that immigrants are somehow stealing their jobs. So one of the things that Attorney General Sessions said in his comments about DACA was that he said, I have the quote, he said, it denied jobs to hundreds of thousands of Americans by allowing some of those same illegal aliens to take those jobs. And it's just patently false. So I don't know how else to state it. That's not a political viewpoint. That's just, it's not accurate, and it's not even close to accurate. So there's this idea in econ called the lump labor fallacy, and that's that there's some fixed amount of jobs that are out there to be divvied up. That's just not true. The economy absorbs new people all the time, right? So you all are going to graduate and go on out into the workforce. That's new people that the economy is absorbing and that it can absorb. And the same thing is true of immigrants. So I think the economic opposition to it, there's just not a lot of evidence that immigration hurts wages or hurts an economy. It's actually quite the opposite. So that's my favorite perspective, but I'm really biased. So.
And then on that, did any of you actually watch any of the coverage, whether it has to do with Jeff Sessions or the White House spokesperson relating to this? So basically, she also indicated that, or tried to make this into a race and ethnicity thing. Oh, well, if we get rid of DACA enrollees, then that means that you black people will have more jobs, right, available. I'm paraphrasing, but it is a paraphrase. However, it was very directly said that these are jobs that could be had by these individuals in these communities. Look at their unemployment rates, so on and so forth. And so in order to try to kind of, drum up support for this particular type of policy, there is some engagement in these attempts to try to pull forward some sort of identity politics that's problematic in putting people against one another. I don't want to take up all of your.
Yeah, if I could just add too that I think sometimes we get stuck in what is the right way to do something, what is the best way to do something. But when it comes to an issue like this, being an advocate, being involved is the only thing you can do. And whatever way you choose to do that is really the best way to do it. So try not to get hung up on what statistics do I pull out, where do I go, what do I do. Write your Congress people, write your senators, be active by coming to things like this, be an ally, be someone that undocumented individuals can talk to. That's the best way to go about this, is just to use whatever privilege you have to fight for people who might be losing theirs.
And just, so we're going to have to wrap up because we can have 2 more. Okay. Perfect. So then to answer that question really quickly, just it's important to recognize the importance of laws in our system, right? We broadly talk about these ideas of law and order and how important they are because that keeps us away from anarchy. But I encourage you to think about the difference between laws that are just and unjust, right? We have to think about what our concept of justice is within this nation, since we say that it's one of our core values, which we can talk about, but then in terms of how we actually engage in doing it is another issue. But when we look back to, let's say, Martin Luther King Jr., I wrote down the quote from a letter from a Birmingham jail. He says, "One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws." Right? So hey, let's have a civil society together. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. And so how we then go about figuring that out, that's the question. But I encourage you to constantly be pushing back against what you find to be a law that is unjust.
You want to go?
Sure. I wanted to build off of the point that you just made of using citizenship as becoming an ally. Are there any resources that you would recommend to make that process a bit easier, or ways to get involved directly?
There is this flyer that tells you how to call or fax or email your representatives, what organizations to join, what petitions to sign, how to donate money. One not listed here is unitedwedream.org, but I think there are several hundreds of copies of this flyer. Who has the copies? So over here and over there, so on the way out, you can get one of these beautiful flyers and you can call your representatives, join groups, advocate, donate, talk to other people, become aware and learn facts so that you are more prepared to talk about the issue.
So you spoke earlier about the Guatemalan woman whose next court was 4 years from her first court, and so for DACA recipients who are going to be pushed to this deportation queue almost probably decades of waiting, what are they supposed to do in the meantime? Will their driver's license be rescinded? Will they lose their homes? Logistically, what will these people do? We already kind of spoke about the money and the school aspect, but other than that, how can these people continue on living their lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think there's kind of a cascade of negative effects, and one of them that you were pointing to is if you lose your employment authorization, are you reasonably expected to just not work anymore? Deal with housing insecurity, food insecurity, just not work? No, what will happen is it forces people back into the labor black market of working under the radar, which many, many employers participate in, some of them willingly and enthusiastically and exploitatively. And so that also means that individuals who are working, under the table without authorization, if they get hurt on the job, they're not necessarily able to access workers' comp. So it encourages across the board unfair labor practices in the United States. And it's not reasonable to expect people not to work and not to earn a living to support themselves and their families. So it's not an answer to your question, which is more of an elaboration on more bad things that will happen.
Just in terms of one other thing, I guess to keep in mind, and not to make this depressing in some way, but we also have to recognize what systems are at work that are kind of hoping to find that this is going to occur, which includes our private prison industry, because they are looking to find these particular policies to go into effect, because when you have these long waiting lines, then you just automatically have a population that then you can benefit off of and pull money out of the government, for, right? And so to push back not just against laws that are related to DACA and immigration in general, but also pushing back against the prison industrial complex would all kind of help to work together to help. But unfortunately, there's not a lot because of exactly what you're talking about with regards to these cascading effects, which is...
Can I use that as a segue to a bullet list of points that hopefully will bring us to a point of outrage that people can no longer contain themselves and they have to jump into action? So this trip that we worked with the Guatemalan woman, we went to a private for-profit prison company. This is civil detention. It's about an hour out into the desert, and so it takes an hour to get there, an hour to get back. Civil immigrant detainees don't have access to counsel unless they pay a private attorney. It costs roughly $400 per body per bed in these immigrant detention facilities. That's what it costs to stay at the O. Henry Hotel in Greensboro. But I visited the facility, and the running water is not potable because it's about 200 yards from a fracking field. You can smell chemicals in the water. And so this is taxpayer funded. Not only that, but Congress has legislated, because of the powerful private prison lobby, that 38,000 immigrant bodies must occupy those beds every day. So the O. Henry doesn't have a deal like that with the federal government. They have to go and compete with other hotels to be the best hotel so people will stay there. But if you walk up to the border and ask for asylum in the United States, what will determine whether or not you go into a detention facility or are just put into deportation proceedings but out on your own recognizance is whether or not that 38,000 threshold has been met. And that is your taxpayer money at work. So I think we can find better ways to spend it.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of the panelists. And thank you for your very interesting and thought-provoking questions. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Ana Silvia.
Yes, thank you all so very much for taking the time to educate us and inform us as to what DACA is, the implementations, the repercussions of it. Hello? Okay, so sorry. Okay, so thanks again. And can we please just give them another big round of applause? Thank you. This concludes the first part of the program. The next part, the deep dive discussion, which features 2 guest speakers who share their stories and as to how DACA has directly impacted them, will begin in a moment.
So before we get started, I wanted to make two quick clarifications about the videos that we watched. In the video, the person said that DACA, and I just want to make sure that we're very clear that DACA was not a visa. A visa means that you can travel to and from freely, and people who had DACA had to pay an additional like 360 some ridiculous dollars, whatever it was, to ask for permission to leave this country. And then on the way back, we would have to pray and hope that that immigration agent will let us back in, and that's not a visa. Okay, so that's one. The other thing that someone talked about was that it also talked about like, you know, us being like on this great, like being able to just work and whatever. I don't know how many of you have been able to look at what DACA meant and like the applications that we had to fill out or not. But let me just tell you that we had to give our fingerprints, like where we lived in the past like 5 years, blah, 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 blah. And then a separate application was that I had to tell the United States government and immigration to, like, I had to actually explain why I needed to work. Like, how many of you can tell me why you need to work? Because you need to eat, right? So, but I had to write an essay saying why I needed to work and then pay additional money for that. And that's why it came out to almost $500. So it wasn't that like Obama decided to sign this either. The reason why Obama signed this wasn't because like government hadn't, or the Congress hadn't signed something. It was because we put pressure on him. He didn't wake up and was like, I'm gonna sign this for these dreamers. So let's make sure that like we don't give credit to the wrong people, because we need to take credit for the fact that we, the youth, made this stuff happen. And we're gonna make it happen again, but we need all of your help. And we need the help of the people that had to leave early, and we need the help of your friends, and we need the help of your family. Well, we can't do this without all of you, right? So take the credit for what we did, because like I said, he didn't wake up one day and decide, I'm gonna help these kids out, because that's not what happened, okay? So now that I got those out of the way, I'm gonna tell you who I am. All right. So my name is Carla Mena, and I was born in Peru, and I lived in Peru until I was 11. And then, for multiple reasons, which economic reasons like always, my family and I decided that we were gonna move to Peru. Notice how I didn't tell you my parents brought me here. We also need to get away from that. I'm tired of the parents being blamed for this. So my family and I came to the United States. We moved to Greensboro, North Carolina, and lived there for about 6 months. And then it was too quiet for us, to be honest. So we moved to Raleigh. Raleigh and Peru have the same flag, except for the stuff in the middle, red, white, and red. Many of y'all don't even know that Raleigh have a flag, but that's how American I am. I know that Raleigh has a flag.
I like that.
Okay, so graduated from high school, from Sanderson High School, SHS, and then, all right, cool. And then I went to Meredith College. And the reason, thankfully, that I went to Meredith College is because Meredith was able to provide a sweet financial package for me, even though I was undocumented, okay? And I had busted my butt studying while doing volunteer activities, playing volleyball, helping my parents with interpreting and everything you can think of, like all the things. So I graduated from Meredith College with a biology degree. And then that was in 2012, right? Meanwhile, by the way, I have been driving without a license, right? So I was only driving to and from Meredith and to work, and then I was like, nah, because if it was too dark, I was not trying to get pulled over, right? So only the essentials. Carla did not have teenage years. I turned 21 reading for my organic chemistry class. There was no partying in my life that really happened because I was too scared to drive. And I had to be okay with that because that was my reality, and I had one goal. I needed to graduate from college, and that's all, right? So I did. I graduated from Meredith College, and I made sure that they gave me my Peruvian flag that some people thought was from Raleigh because they were a little bit older and they knew their history, and that was okay. But when I graduated, which was in May, I didn't know what I was going to do because we're in an E-Verify community, and for me to be able to work in a lab or me to work in public health, I needed to have a Social Security number, which I didn't have, and my tax ID number, which the U.S. very happily provides so that I can actually report my taxes, wasn't going to get me nowhere. And with all the pressure that we had continued, like I said, to put on President Obama, he, in June 15th, which, by the way, marked years of me being in this country, because we entered the U.S. on June 15, 2001. June 15, 2012, he signs the executive order and makes the announcement of DACA, right? So I then had to wait until August 15 to make sure I could apply for DACA. But before that, I had to make sure that I could prove to the U.S. that I had been here when he made that announcement. So I had to run to Bank of America, make a deposit, just so I could make some type of receipt and proof that I had been here. Because even at that point, I had to prove to America that I had been here, right? Because at some point, I was trying to be under the radar, but in that moment, I had to prove that I had been here. And then I was like, and how am I supposed to get that money? Because there were two of us, my brother and I. That's almost $1,000. And we all know that as people of color, you don't have money laying around. So pull money out of the places where you don't have to get that. And then help your community to make sure that no lawyer, no notario was making money off of the backs of the people that have been suffering for years, because they were trying to do that, right? So that's what happened. I was able to get my DACA. It took forever and a day. The Social Security Administration office took forever to send my Social Security card. My fingerprints appointment took forever. And here I was, palm sweating like crazy. Finally, everything comes through. Okay, I'm able to go work. I get a job at Duke. I've been there for 3.5 years. I am like the token Latina of every board you can think of, and I rock it everywhere because you know what? They need me. They need me everywhere, and I work it, and I am good at it because I know you need me, but I am there, and I do the best I can because you need me, but my community needs me to do really good at it so that I can pull the interests of my community and make sure that my community is heard on your board. Because if I am on the board of the FQHC, the Federally Qualified Health Center, your stuff better be in Spanish too, right? Because I'm not gonna forget my community. But now, that got rescinded. So what did I think that day? WREL Fox 5 called me. Hey, do you think it can be like on camera when the announcement is made? And I was like, and I knew what was gonna happen. Let's be serious. So I was like, sure. So puts the camera on me. He makes the announcement. And what really got me was when Sessions says that we needed to assimilate immigrants. Because I don't know about y'all, but Peruvian food is known around the world as the #1.
It's really good. Yeah.
Everywhere. Right? And so I'm not trying to lose that. And I'm really sorry that my white friends have lost that. So we don't need to be assimilating nobody. But he says that on national TV, and he's really proud of that. And I'm like, why did he think that was okay? Why did he think that we can just be another blank statement? That's not okay. He has his food, I got my food. I'm not trying to lose that, right? And my struggles don't need to be whitewashed because that's what makes me a person. So no, you're not gonna assimilate that. No, you're not gonna just erase my history because I'm not going to let you. But that means that all of you in this room, some of you asked what you need to do. You need to make sure you find out what I've gone through, what he's gone through, what all my other friends have gone through, because that will enrage you. And when you find out the stories that I continue to hear and the stories that are continuing to happen to this day, you will get out and you will continue, no matter how tired you are, because I am on 2 hours of sleep right now, and I continue to get up and go to work. But on 1 hour of sleep, you will be like, let's go. We're going to DC. Because that's what we did. And we're tired, and we're still going. But there's no reason to stop fighting. Yes, maybe we will be on deportation procedures, but that's in 6 months. From now into those 6 months, we got a lot of work to do so that we are not in deportation procedures in 6 months. So thank you for taking the time to be here, but I really need y'all to be with me, all right? Because this is not a check, I made it today and I'm done for the week or for the month. That is not what I need. I'm 27 and I'm getting older. Y'all are looking really young, so I need you with me, okay?
And to that effect, please, so sorry, out near the door, we will be taking people's emails if you're interested.
Yes.
In what comes next here on campus, how it's going to continue, and different events that we will be having. So you can see ladies near the door.
Right there.
Give their emails before you head out. So sorry.
Go ahead, Tito.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to follow that up.
He's really good. I train him well.
Yeah. So my name is one of the illegal aliens that y'all hear about all the time, because that's what we're known as. I mean, the reason I guess I started with that is because we're in this room because of lack of basic mutual human understanding. The reason why we have to sit here and explain to y'all why our existence matters, or why our lives are important, or why we deserve to have basic human rights, and to be valued and be allowed to own a driver's license or be able to work, is all because of the dehumanization and criminalization of our communities. So we come from countries that have been destabilized, that don't offer a lot of opportunities, and for my example, in my case, I come from Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua, Mexico, and I hate to even mention this or even try to exploit this in any way to prove why it is that I'm here. But at some point, somebody, I don't know, it was labeled one of the most dangerous cities in the world because of the homicide rates being so high, because of all the women's bodies who were disappearing and being found in the deserts, and because my parents knowing that that was not an environment that they wanted their kids to grow up in. All a parent wants is to have somewhere where their children they know they will return home every day, and where they have the ability to make something of themselves. And poverty can only offer you so much. The reason why we come here, the reason why we're pushed to come to this country, is not because one day we just decided, hey, it'd be cute if we risk everything in our lives and leave everything behind just to go to another country where everybody already hates you and you can barely have you know, the opportunities that you're like aiming to get, I guess. So we came here out of like survival, and that's the reason why and like Carla was saying, the whole narrative that everybody's pushing here, that the dreamers or the DACA recipients or whatever came here of no fault of their own, always creates this fake narrative that it's all our parents' fault, and that our parents are who created these systems in which they had to, you know, come here. And you're basically making us, you know, sacrifice the lives of our family members and everybody that we love in our communities just for like the sake of us being able to advance. And that just puts people in like a very horrible like position. But I guess to keep going with that, yeah. So I came here in 2003 when I was 6 years old. I've lived in Raleigh, North Carolina ever since. I'm 20. And I mean, yeah, I always grew up with the basic knowledge of the fact that it's like, hey, like, you're not a regular person, you're quote unquote illegal. And just always trying to like compartmentalize that into your mind and being like, hey, as you're like sitting in your classroom or whatever, pretending that everything's okay, trying to get an education and get ahead in life is like, hey, you can't go to school, you can't drive, you can't get a job. Like always in the back of your mind, like people don't think about like the psychological toll that puts on people and just like all the different ways in which that affects, you know, people, but like, you know, whole communities, and just like kids growing up. So you're telling me like that the only way to get ahead in life is to get an education, and yet there's no pathway for me to get one. Like, what do you expect? And then you talk about how like we don't do anything of ourselves, you know. We get pregnant in high school, or you know, we're only like thugs and criminals and rapists, or whatever. When you're not giving people any other avenues to, you know, get ahead. Again, it puts us in a very difficult situation. So when something like DACA, which we all know was not a solution, we also know that it did not even like offer a pathway to citizenship or anything of the sort. It just offered the basic ability to own a driver's license and to work and go to school. And you're saying, hey, you know, it's a good idea, you know, all these people that are now able to contribute and are now able to, you know, I guess fulfill basic daily tasks, if we take that away from them and then just kind of see what happens. Because people are asking me, it's like, so what are you gonna do now that DACA's over or whatever? Like, I'm not just gonna crawl in a hole or like walk back to Mexico. Like my only option is to stay here and do exactly what I've been doing this whole time. And if that like means, you know, working illegally, driving illegally, or going to school without a social security number, then like I'm gonna do what I can because I don't have any other options. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. We don't really have a prompt.
Yeah, and I think that just reminded me. Someone earlier asked, you know, like, should someone start looking to go to Canada or like Switzerland? And I really wanted to answer that question like immediately. And because
if it was that easy, we'd have left.
Well, that, and also, right. But also, I think as people who have had to leave another country before, like the fact that we've left something before, and even like for me at least, like I was 11 when I came to this country, right? So I have some memories of Peru, and that like over 90% of my family is still in Peru. So I think it's almost unfair to have that question be asked. But also, like, I don't want to move to Canada. Like my Southern American like way of thinking is so strong that like, why would I ever think about moving to Canada? Like, no. You know, because that's so ingrained. I like grew up thinking that Canada is so lame. Who would want to move there? And when people say that, when I say that to people, they're like, "What is wrong with you?" And I'm like, "But really, like, think about that." And they're like, and usually it's like people from the north that they're like, "Why would you say that out loud?" And I'm like, "Because I grew up here." And they're like, "You're really Southern." And like, But really, right? I mean, we have all these things that we grew up with that are so ingrained in ourselves. And we're so loyal to this country that is so not loyal to us. And that is so wrong, right? So wrong. And I really don't, I mean, I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I am done trying to prove to America that I have to be here. Like, I think I've lived for such a long time wanting to, like, to be here and to prove that I should be here, and I am done doing that. I think it's about human dignity, and I think we have been so removed from that at this point. And I hope that a DREAM Act passes or a comprehensive immigration reform passes, but I am done proving that I should be here because not just me, but like who wouldn't want all this 800,000 people that have been so productive in this nation, and like we have been working our butts off to be part of society, and we have done so much to be part, and we keep getting rejected. So maybe if we just stopped, we would be noticed. I don't know, but we have just done so much, and I think that it's time for us to be recognized and like be elevated instead of being told that we're not wanted here.
Yeah.
So if someone has questions, I guess this would be the time.
Can you talk more about some of the myths surrounding DACA? You said it was a path to citizenship, it was a visa. Is there anything else that's a huge misconception in the media that people aren't aware of because it's not being talked about?
Yeah, so some of the misconceptions are that this was an amnesty. If this had been an amnesty, we wouldn't be so like in such a chaos. We would have had citizenship now, right? So definitely not an amnesty.
Yeah, one of the most frustrating things ever is every time I've gone lobbying or like try to talk to like one of our representatives or whatever, they look at me straight in the face and they're like, "Why haven't you become a citizen yet?" Like like I'm trying to explain to them like I can't even get a driver's license, and they're over here asking why I'm not a citizen yet. So like the biggest misconception I think of all is just people's concept of like the U.S. immigration system. Like it does not work in like a line. It doesn't even work in general, but it can take up to like 20 years for someone to even, be considered for residency. So when we have absolutely no pathway to citizenship. DACA didn't offer a pathway to citizenship, therefore there was no amnesty. And it could have been revoked at any time.
Mm-hmm.
And we did not receive any benefits. We could not qualify for FAFSA or any kind of other governmental aid. And we still had to pay out-of-state tuition to go to or attend a university or institution like this. So it really, it helped us in the way of like, facilitating being able to do basic things. But that's basically all it was. And the fact that we're fighting so hard for just this is just, it says so much,
How you guys doing? I guess my question is like two-pronged. First, as a person of color, I understand the concept of stereotype threat. Understanding that once you get called a thug, so many times you just want to become one because you're frustrated with the narrative that has been placed on your life. Can you talk a little bit about what stereotype threat has done for you and how that has shaped the way in which you approach the situations you're in, first, and then second, as a psychology major, it's always intriguing to me to understand the human mind and specifically trauma. Can you talk a little bit about how the psychological stress of the threat of deportation and the threat of uncertainty going forward has affected your lives and how you perceive that?
So I guess in terms of stereotypes, I don't know, I guess I've always just been a little odd, even like within my own community. So, I guess when I think of stereotypes, like because it is a stereotype and isn't real, like I kind of think of it as like this other kind of like intangible person or whatever in which they're referencing, and it kind of doesn't apply to me. So like to me personally, I'm just like, oh, like whatever. But then again, it's like to the people that are making the laws that dictate our lives every single day. And when they hear those things, and then when they look at us and that intangible person that I imagine is what they actually see, like that's when it actually like, you know, matters and makes an impact, I guess. I don't know.
Tito has always been too cool for life.
Love it.
I will say that there was a time right when I was a senior in high school, and I was like, I'm not gonna apply. Like, you know, like everyone around me had decided that I had applied, you know, like there was no question that I had applied to all the colleges, because like all the colleges had come and like try to recruit me and everything. And so like everyone was fooled and everyone thought I had applied to school. And so like people had written letters and like sent my recommendation letters, and my transcripts were out and like sent and everything, right? But I hadn't applied. And so it actually, and I was like, I'm just not, like in that moment, I was like, what's the point? Like there's no reason to apply. And I don't think I've actually shared this story with anyone before. So, and then it took someone, however, to be like, did you apply? I was like, no. And she said, why not? And I said, I just don't think I should. And she made me, like the day before the applications were due, she said, you're going to apply. And if it wasn't for that person, I wouldn't have gotten into school. But it really, like, there was just so much. And I think, you know, when I was, there have been very key moments in my life. And when I was a senior in high school, it was because North Carolina was talking about not allowing the undocumented students into colleges. And it was particularly like technical colleges, but I'm too, like, sometimes I get really into my head about just the better of the whole world, and in that point, it was like too much for me. So if a lot of my friends were not going to get into school, why would I get into school? And that was what was, you know, bringing me down. And then recently, when DACA got rescinded, I have found myself just feeling like I did not want to do a lot of things. And it's been a lot of flashbacks, you know, and I start to think about the trauma. And I think a lot of people consider me as a very strong person. And I stop and I think, like, if I'm feeling this way, I don't know how other people are feeling, right? And so there's a lot of moments when I need to think about self-care. And I don't tend to do a lot of that, and I tend to just plow through life and go through because I need to continue and whatever. But it takes a lot, and I think the fear of deportation never stopped, because even though we were supposed to be on deferred action, there were still people getting deported, and that's just something we have had to live with, and that has been something that has weighed on us for years. So unfortunately, we also live in a southern state, right? So there are beauty and not so beautiful things, and that's just our reality. So help us fight, but also help us take care of ourselves, because we need that. We need the manpower for backing us up.
Well, as our time is now coming to an end, I would like us to please give a big round of applause to our two guest speakers. I think that it's very important not to see this issue just in terms of the numbers but to remember that it is a human issue. There are humans, families, brothers, sisters, mothers, daughters at the end of this process. Their futures are on the line. And so I would like to reiterate to all of you that this is not a one and done process or event. This is something that we will be fighting for the next 6 months. And it's our job as the others, as people who have the privilege and who have the opportunity to make our voices heard, help those whose voices have now been silenced. So I would encourage you all to please sign up at the end and help us as we try to make this change.
Thank you all.